Hello, my name is Sophie Lee, and I'm doing my presentation on the Great Paris Cipher. So, first of all, who made it? The Great Cipher was created by a father and son. The father was Antoine, and the son was Bonaventure Rossignol in the mid 17th century, so 1612, I think it was. So, Antoine and his son worked for Louis XIV, the King of France, and they used their code system to send secret political and military messages. And it was very successful. No one knew how to crack it for the next 250 years. So basically almost 3 centuries, and that's very impressive. And because it was so complicated, there are still some French literary artifacts that are almost impossible to read. So, how was it used? So, this right here is sort of a table code book that, as you can see, there are a lot of French words that I cannot pronounce or read. But the code, the Great Cipher, was a monoalphabetic substitution cipher. So, usually with codes, people do letter substitutions, but this was French syllables, which made it a lot more difficult to decipher. So there were 587 numbers for different syllables, and so encryption, unlike most ciphers, like what I was just talking about, it was syllable based instead of letter based. And the more people tried to discover how to crack the code, there were found some number sets in this table and probably other code books where there were a lot of invalid numbers and sets on purpose to throw enemies off, and they were meant to be ignored by the decryptors. So anyone who already knew the code knew what to ignore, what to pay attention to. And so these three things, frequency analysis, pattern recognition, and guessing common phrases, those are practices that people normally use to crack codes. Finding frequency in numbers and typical syllables in the French language, that would have been really good to learn how to encrypt things. And so here's a closer look at some of the letters, the numbers associated with those letters, and a lot of this, I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not able to completely understand, but you could tell that they knew what they were doing at least. So with the decryption, like I said, almost 300 years later, after it was completely unsolvable, Etienne Bazeres cracked the Great Cipher in 1893 after studying it for 3 years. And that was very hard. I was reading articles about him, and he was raised by a police detective and would do puzzles and stuff in newspapers for fun until he was taking tests to become a professional decryptor for World War II for the army. And so then when he cracked the Great Cipher, and the French didn't know what to do. So these numbers right here were translated to, say, the enemies. And so after he was able to decrypt these numbers, that allowed him to decipher the rest of the Great Cipher. Well, sorry, not the rest. There's still a lot that hasn't been discovered yet because obviously he died, and he was one of the only people to solve it. So and yes, as I was saying, even with all that Bazeres was able to decode, there are very many there are very few people like him today that are able to do something like that. And so, because of this, there are many French archives and articles such that were made with the Great Paris Cipher, and yeah, so it's almost impossible to interpret them. And there you go. These are my sources.